Imperial Yeast has been up to some interesting things lately, and they recently announced a product we are super excited about. If you're familiar with Imperial Yeast, you're likely aware of their classification system. A is for ale as an A07 flagship, L is for lager as an L17 harvest, and so on. Well, they recently released the first strain in their I series, which stands for Imperialis and refers to non-GMO hybrids or derivative yeast strains developed by Imperial Yeast that have been honed to exhibit the traits today's brewers most desire. The initial offering, I-22 Capri, is a hybrid of A38 Juice and A43 Loki, two of Imperial's most popular strains for hop-forward IPA. Whether you're into this style or just enjoy juicier fermentation characteristics, you have got to try I-22 Capri. Learn more about the Imperialis project and I-22 Capri at imperialyeast.com. Ask any brewer what the primary source of fermentable sugar in beer is, and their immediate response will almost certainly be barley malt, and that's because that's true. However, brewers are also very well aware of the fact that barley is not the only cereal grain used to make beer. In fact, several other grains have been used for about as long and continue to be used for specific purposes these days. This is the Brewlosophy Podcast. I'm your host, Marshall Schott, and today I'm joined by contributor Steve Thanos to chat about the use of oats in beer, focusing specifically on the differences between a couple widely available forms that oats come in.
Yeah, oats, I always think of the darker beers like a porter or a stout, and seeing that it's early December, that's where my mind goes to. So it's just perfect timing to be talking about oats.
Yeah, I'm with you. Oats to me, now I've had some really interesting oat beers. I'm sure we'll hit on that here in a bit. But to me, dark beers are where, they're kind of known for being now. In the couple of decades that I've been brewing beer, I've used oats quite a bit personally. And while I initially stuck with the stuff I could get from my local homebrew shop, which I believe they just go by flaked oats, I did make the switch to store-bought many years back and have not had any issues with that. Now, that said, I have been curious about the differences between common, quote, old-fashioned oats, as they're called, and quick oats when it comes to their impact on beer character, both of which I've used. And again, to my palate and in my experience, it's worked out about the same, but that is exactly what we're going to be talking about today with an experiment comparing those two. Alrighty, if you're a fan of this show and you'd like to receive a reward for your support, please consider becoming a patron of Brewlosophy over at patreon.com/Brewlosophy. By making a small monthly pledge, you'll receive rewards like access to unpublished contributor recipes, unique discounts at YakimaValleyHops.com, and an invite to a monthly live Q&A session with somebody in the brewing world. Coming up in December of 2024, Brewlosophy's own Alex Shanks Abel will be taking the pulpit. While one of the newest contributors to the crew, Alex has actually been involved with Brewlosophy for a few years now, as they were one of the folks who helped build the Brew Club into what it is today. If you happen to be a fan of the Brewlosophy show, our YouTube channel, then you've likely caught Alex on a couple episodes over there as well. Alex will be hanging out with patrons on Sunday, December 29th, 2024. So all you have to do is make your pledge of just $3 or more by Saturday, the 28th, to be part of what will ultimately be our final Q&A session of the year. All past sessions are stored on our private Patreon and Facebook pages, so patrons can go back and watch them whenever they like. Learn more about all of the rewards we offer for your support and become a patron today over at patreon.com/Brewlosophy. Another really easy way to support us is by using the links found at brewlosophy.com/support when shopping online. Your experience doesn't change at all, and we get a little kickback for the referral. This is especially important now during the holiday season while everybody's doing their gift shopping online. Feedback is brought to you by Clawhammer Supply, who, in addition to having an awesome YouTube channel chock full of great brewing-related content, sell some of what we believe to be are the best electric systems on the market. If you've been considering making the move from propane to electric, you owe it to yourself to check out Clawhammer Supply. Whether you're after a 120-volt 5-gallon unit or something bigger like their powerful 240-volt 10-gallon system, Clawhammer has got you covered. Learn more about everything they have to offer at clawhammersupply.com, and don't forget to check out their YouTube channel as well. Listener Peter wrote in with some feedback a while ago that unfortunately ended up getting buried in my inbox, but I wanted to get back to it as I feel it is relevant and probably relatable by a lot of our listeners. Peter said, "I'm a pro brewer and I listen to your podcast pretty often. Brewing is my third career. I spent 20 plus years in marketing. A good chunk of that time was spent as the vice president of marketing for a trade association. With that experience in mind, I wanted to offer some perspective on the AHA situation that has been unfolding. I think there's a large piece of this discussion that's not being included. While Julia's comments in the interview with John were something that would have made me shit myself if I was the communications person at the BA AHA, it's worth pointing out that the AHA, along with the entirety of what I'll call the advocacy industry, has been on a downward slide for the past decade or longer, and she stepped into the role of captain of the Titanic as the stern of the ship lifted into the air. First and foremost, it's important to understand that in the 80s and 90s, trade and hobbyist associations became financially dependent on trade shows like HomebrewCon. The bulk of the profit from these events comes from educational offerings and sponsorships. With the rise of the internet, conventions started seeing a significant decline in attendance. With declines in attendance, it became harder to get sponsors. As the events shrank, that made it more difficult to justify sponsorships. In parallel, the internet started offering a lot of the educational content that used to be the domain of these conventions. And then there was the pandemic. So that's the world in which organizations like the AHA and the BA find themselves. The failure comes from the fact that this has been happening over nearly 2 decades, and the BA AHA has failed to adjust the business model and take advantage of myriad opportunities to remain relevant to the communities they serve. One simple example would be how the AHA deals with competitions. If they had started offering a platform for running competitions and offered it free to clubs, etc., they would have been in a position to not only offer clubs a standardized platform and brewers a single login tied to their AHA membership, this would have allowed them to create national rankings and database of judges and their scoring. That could generate revenue by taking a small percentage of the entry fees while making homebrew competitions more fun and interesting for everybody concerned. In short, the issue here is that the entire business model on which the BA and AHA are based is obsolete. So that being the case, I would be curious to know what you and the folks at Brewlosophy would suggest to make the AHA more relevant to homebrewers. I feel like there's a lot of cursing the darkness without any effort to add some light that might guide the association so that it can better serve the homebrewing community. Such a thoughtful piece of feedback, Steve, that I'm fascinated to hear your response to.
I was really interested in what Peter was going to say here. I wholeheartedly agree with him. I think that ultimately what I think a lot of people's problem, and I know mine was the fact that it had to do a lot with dollar amount, and the cost in which to attend JABF, to go to HomebrewCon as it is now organized, and also the cost of the competition, I believe, has gone up. Correct me if I'm wrong. So I think from my perspective, it's always about the almighty dollar, right?
Yeah.
And it's I'm not getting enough on my return for the money that I'm putting forth year in and year out. So I think that's where ultimately where I stand. And I don't know if I have a solution like Peter is asking for. And I do agree with him that there are not many solutions being given.
Yeah.
But I don't think gouging people for more money because the organization isn't doing well financially,
right,
that should not become my burden. And I would imagine a lot of people would echo that same sentiment. If we were given the information ahead of time and in a much more eloquent way than I'm going to say it right now, like, hey, we're struggling, and in order to do this, we need to do X, Y, and Z. I could be on board with that a little bit more so than just, pulling the sheets over my head and saying, okay, well, you're just going to take it and here you go.
Yeah.
This is what it is.
And to me, the sentiment that and I'm going to use words here not to judge you, Steve, but we're presuming that the sentiment of the BA is that, hey, we're this organization that you benefit from, and so you should appreciate us enough to not even ask why dues are going up and why you have to pay more for this and that. And with paired with that is less in return for you, because who's actually using the app that the Brew Guru app that they came out with? I mean, the reason they don't have it anymore is because it just wasn't getting use. That's not how the younger generation, who, I'm not among the younger generation anymore. Either are you, Steve. We know this very well. Just look at our hair color. But that's not how that's not what entices them. And I think that there is this, to me, it's almost an interesting analog between the way, and I'll blame the BA on many levels, that they are a big, reason that the hate of big beer is out there. Little did they realize that big beer, or that craft beer, couldn't exist without big beer. They are symbiotic. Right. And that if we had taken a different approach 30, 40 years ago and not gone hate, but gone, hey, we're just offering something different, then maybe we would have attracted more of those big beer drinkers into the craft beer world, and then they end up homebrewing and all of that. I mean, it's all just speculation. Now, I do not disagree with Peter's assessment about there being a lot of, finger wagging in the absence of proposed solutions. And if I came across that way, it certainly wasn't my intention to do so. But that said, I honestly don't have a solution to propose on this, in part because I'm not an expert on building and sustaining organizations like the AHA. That's not my job. I'm a member, and I was a member. I am now because they gifted me another year. I appreciate them for doing that. I think it's sweet of them to offer me this because we're on a podcast or whatever, but it's still, I got a Zymergy magazine, and that's it, and I'm not dissing them. Part of it is almost like sympathy, like, dude, do something different. Now, when my expectations aren't met, when it's something that I'm paying for, I expect to get something in return. That is how our culture works. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. My paying the AHA was not a donation. That is not how I considered it. So when those expectations aren't met, I'm going to stop paying for it. And that's what happened. Right. Now, that's not to say I wouldn't love to see a turnaround, but I'm not going to pretend that I know how to make that happen. That is not my realm. I wish I could offer solutions. It sounds like Peter's probably got better ideas than any of us would have, because he's been in that world. He knows how to swim in that ocean, as it were. The BA is a relatively large organization with a bunch of moving parts. And while it seems that maybe they've stopped caring as much about the AHA, at least based on some of the stuff we heard about the now former CEO of the BA, maybe it is possible to right this ship. But like Peter, I don't personally feel that's possible without completely changing the business model. What worked 15, 20, 30 years ago just isn't going to work today. Things are too different in brewing, and things are different in the mindset of the people who are going to be getting into homebrewing. So I won't rehash everything that I've said on past episodes. It would be so easy for you and me to go down that rabbit hole, Steve. But for what it's worth, I am holding out hope that some good changes come sooner than later. And if that means, a spawn of what the BA once was, and they dissolve, I'm okay with that at this point. I don't feel like we're getting much out of it. A lot of the professional brewers that I speak to these days are they're also doing the same thing. They're ditching the BA. They're not feeling like they're getting anything out of it. So maybe there does, sometimes the fire's got to burn a little bit in order for us to rebuild it. So perhaps that's where we're at. And again, we'll leave it alone. We could spend a whole other episode on this, I'm sure, and perhaps we'll do that in the future. But for now, thank you for the feedback, Peter. If you have show feedback, you can send it to feedback@brewlosophy.com or leave us a note on social media. Please, if you haven't already, go check out our YouTube channel, The Brewlosophy Show. Host Martin Keene has put so much time and effort into this project, and he has got some really fun stuff in store for the future. We were just talking about plans for 2025 with some new series and such. You can find The Brewlosophy Show by going to youtube.com/@The Show, or simply searching YouTube for Brewlosophy. Make sure you subscribe so you're notified when new episodes drop. Alrighty, when we're back from this break, our focus will be on brewing with oats. Chilling work can be a chore, especially after a long brew day, but not with the Xchillerator Counterflow Chiller, which can chill a 5-gallon or 19-liter batch of wort in 5 minutes or less, leading to a strong cold break and clear wort in the fermenter. Brewlosophy's Matt Del Fiacco uses the Xchillerator Max and absolutely loves it. In addition to improved chilling efficiency, every Xchillerator comes with a 5-year warranty that covers the entire chiller for manufacturer defects. If you're looking to up your chilling game and a CFC is right for you, head over to xchillerator.com today. As every brewer knows, the best beer requires the best hops, which Yakima Valley Hops provides fresh from the source to brewers around the world, carrying everything from classics like Cascade to modern favorites like Galaxy and Mosaic, as well as other ingredients and gear. Yakima Valley Hops has it all. And don't forget to check out their new podcast, The Late Edition, where the YVH crew goes into depth on our favorite plant with industry experts. Head over to YakimaValleyHops.com now to see all they have to offer and subscribe to The Late Edition wherever it is you listen to podcasts.
Got great ideas, but no idea how to build a website? Get Bluehost. Their AI design tool creates high-quality WordPress sites super fast. Whether you're a blogger, influencer, or launching a side hustle, Bluehost helps boost your growth with built-in marketing and e-commerce tools. Upgrade to cloud and get 100% uptime and 24/7 security to stay online all the time. Why wait? You've got the vision. Make it real. Visit Bluehost.com to get started.
New York Times bestselling author Jennifer L. Armentrout's Blood and Ash series is captivating and sexy. Chosen at birth to usher in a new era, Poppy's life has never been hers. Waiting for the day of her ascension, she would rather be with the gods fighting the evil that took her family. The entire kingdom rests on her shoulders when Hawk, a god bound to her ascension, enters her life. She is tangled with desire. He tempts her with the forbidden, a kingdom. Blood and Ash, a twisting, steamy escape, available in print, ebook, and audiobook where books are sold.
Associated more with breakfast than brewing, oats have been used to make beer for nearly as long as barley has, though these days it's typically viewed more as a specialty grain or adjunct used for very specific purposes or in very specific styles. As is the case with most modern brewing ingredients, oats have been used in the production of beer for quite a while, but the history of it, at least what I could dig up, I think is pretty interesting.
For sure. I've been fascinated by just kind of learning the research that I was doing in preparation for today's podcast, and also in years past researching it for other blogs. And it's interesting, and it's something that I didn't really know that there was that much information about on the topic of oats out there. So
yeah, well, and so either did I. And now, obviously, we can't do a full episode, or we'd go on for hours and hours talking about like the domestication of oats and all of this stuff. But
right.
As it relates to brewing, we'll try to hit on some of the more interesting things. Now, one of the things I read that I found most curious was that there's evidence that oats obviously were being used in brewing in the United Kingdom for hundreds of years. Like I said, similar to barley, right? They are cereal grains. They can be malted, all of that. But it was mostly in Scotland where oats had found favor as a nourishing food item among citizens who lived there at the time. Now, this is like mid-19th century, so like 1800s and stuff. You think about it, this didn't occur to me until I read this, that in England and other areas of Europe, in fact, oats were viewed largely as just food for livestock. I mean, they're harvesting the groats, which is the unprocessed hulled, oat kernel, and they're feeding it to their livestock, and it worked fine. But up in Scotland, they're like, well, maybe we should try eating this horse food, or this cow food, and it worked, right? And we kind of have them, according to my reading, we kind of have the Scots to thank for us having oatmeal and oatmeal cookies and all the wonderful things that we're able to make with oats. Now, by the late 19th century, the use of oats as human sustenance had increased enough to where brewers in the UK were starting to use it for their own good, or eating it even as well. But because it was a good source of vitamins and minerals, it's high in fiber, it's got all of this great stuff for your heart. I'm sure they didn't even know the word cholesterol back then, but who knows? There was a lot of good benefits to eating oats at the time. And so it became more a part of the regular, kitchen stock back then.
It's really interesting that talking about the health benefits of oats. Of course, we're inundated with that information these days, right? With like lowering your cholesterol and whatnot. But,
right.
What I found interesting was taking it a step further in England and in the UK, having people marketing their beers as like this healthy. Oh, there's a healthy beer, quote unquote. It's pure genius in my mind.
Evil genius.
Yeah, of course. When I read that years ago, I was like, Oh, okay. Well, yeah, it kind of makes sense. And, good on you for making that, that jump from, the health benefits to eat oats to health benefits to include it in my beer. So, hey, if it works, it works. I have no complaints over that.
Well, here's the thing. Here's my thinking about it, Steve, is that, you've got back. We know that marketing in the 19th century was a lot of, the term snake oil came from that whole thing, right? Snake oil salesmen, these grifters are going along just trying to make a buck. And they're marketing this, panaceas and these cure-alls that have like morphine, cannabis, and cocaine in them. Of course, it's going to make you feel good,
Of course.
And so the fact that they took this health food, oats, that they were able to find, hey man, it's great for your gut, all these things, and then they start marketing it to very specific audiences, cracked me up. It's at the time I'd have been the guy. Well, I like to think that I would have been the guy who's like, that's such crap. Come on now. This is not real. Right. It's beer, but people were gullible back then, I guess. And they bought into this idea that if you drink an oatmeal stout or stout in general, and you're a nursing mother, it'll help, milk production, or you've got, dysentery or something, drink some oatmeal stout and it'll cure you up, like we know that is bohunkus these days, as my grandpa would say, but
it's a great word.
I think that we have that evil genius to thank for the fact that oat beers or oat being used in beer is still so common today, because it normalized it, right? It normalized the use of this alternative grain that's not barley malt in beer, which does have, according to many, right, whether anecdote or not, it does have a meaningful impact on certain characteristics in beer. And I love that.
For sure. And even going back to what you were talking about with the nursing mothers, Drew Beecham actually introduced a beer that he found from somebody else that schooled him on this beer for nursing mothers, and he shared the recipe years ago. And as time would go on, we would find out about this. My good friends down the street from us were having their second or third kid, and I brewed that beer that Drew had shared, and it was utterly horrible. It was not good. Probably as bad as the Ube IPA that I just released a week ago. But I mean, the whole idea of it was, to the nourishment factor of the oats that were in it. So I don't know. I'm still kind of it makes me laugh, but at the same time, it's it's a good memory. So.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you, first off, accepting a recipe from Drew Beecham, you are a very brave man, Steve, because Drew makes things like guacamole beer and clam chowder beer, which I've tried.
Right.
And, so, but I will say though, that, this idea of using a nourishing ingredient, to make beer, thinking from the modern 21st century mindset with how we understand fermentation and the beer making process, if I suspend that, I guess I can kind of get there. Like, well, hey, oats are good. They make me, feel better when I eat them. Maybe if I drink them, it will as well. I don't think that's a commonly accepted idea these days. I kind of hope it's not.
No.
But it is, again, back then, and we have those weirdos back then to thank for a lot of what we benefit from today, is all I'm going to say.
Sure.
And so moving forward a little bit, let's just talk more specifically about the use of oats in beer. So like barley, oats are a cereal grain that can be treated in various ways to prepare them for use in beer, but there are some difference between these, between oats and barley. So first off, and here's the thing, huge disclaimer. I am by no means a oat farmer. I have not studied oats in the way an oat expert may have. This is a lot of the information that we discuss on this episode and in many of our episodes is based on our experience over our decades of brewing with these ingredients and our experiences with them. So if we got something wrong, we're not trying to spin anybody the wrong way. Please correct us and we'll call it out. So my understanding is that oats have slightly higher protein content than barley, which is purported to contribute to better foam quality, better head retention, but only when you use it in moderation. And it can also, this higher protein content, which we are very familiar with, this can lead to issues with haze or difficulty clearing up the beer, as well as some issues with fermentation if it's overdone.
Yeah, I mean, I would always think, I've always been really not very heavy-handed on using oats in my recipes. And I'm sure we'll get to the percentages later on as we talk about my recipe. But yeah, I'm always trying to keep it on the lower side.
Yeah. Well, and from if you just Google, how much oats to use in beer, the recommendation is usually like between 10 and 15%, unless you're making something like a Pivo Grodzicki, which is an oat, a smoked oat beer. Those have their own set of characteristics and guidelines by which, you're hoping to hit. But typically it's recommended at 10 to 15% because of the fact that it also has this higher lipid or fat or oil content than barley does. So again, in higher amounts, while you might be using oats to contribute better foam quality, it could have a negative effect. It could actually be foam negative. Just drop some, oil on a foamy beer and see what happens. It's why you can take your finger and touch the foam on a freshly poured soda like a Coke, and it'll disintegrate. Is because it breaks that surface tension. So these are things to keep in mind as we discuss the use of oats. None of it is using high amounts. We are talking about using the recommended 10 to 15%. They also have slightly higher beta glucan content than barley. Now, beta glucan, if you've ever made a rye beer, rye beers, if you go 20% or more, you're going to perceive a viscosity to that is not. It's not snotty, as some would say, but it definitely feels like it's just a thicker bodied beer. Well, oats have higher beta glucan than barley as well, so it can increase that perceived viscosity, which can lead or help contribute to this perception of a word that we often associate with the use of oats, which is silky or creamy mouthfeel.
Yeah, my wife is always laughing at me when I start talking about mouthfeel of beers. I think she thinks it's like overly pretentious and snobby and like, talking about the mouthfeel of my beer. And it's just hilarious and just running joke that we have. But I mean, it's something that us beer nerds like to talk about, and damn it, it's the mouthfeel. So that's what it's all about.
That's what we call it. Yeah, exactly.
Right, exactly. Yeah. I didn't make up the rules.
Or the terminology. But that's the thing, right? If
right.
Your aim is to increase that creaminess, then you've got to be judicious with the oat usage, because it is highly talked about as being a contributor to that creaminess. But here's just an anecdote. I made a brown ale one time. I think I called it like oatmeal brown ale because of how much oats. It was an experimental batch on its own. This was before Brewlosophy, and I used like 50% flaked oats, and the beer came out tasting great, but it was shockingly thin. And the only thing my friends and I, my nerdy beer friends and I could point at as being the culprit for that thinness was the fact that so much of that fat content made its way in there that it kind of thinned things out beyond what the beta glucan and the protein would contribute. It was also crystal clear, which I thought was fascinating, right? Now, maybe that had to do with the type of oats I was using. I forget if I used, Quaker old fashioned, or if I used probably flaked oats from the brewing store, because that's what I was doing back then. But it's a really interesting, in my experience, it's just a really interesting ingredient that doesn't always do what it's claimed to do when used in certain ways. So these are just things to keep in mind. Now, one unique characteristic of oats is that they are gluten-free when compared to barley, which is not gluten-free. So what I have seen lately with, as kind of you hear more and more about people with gluten intolerance or celiacs, is the use of oats in beer to produce largely beer flavored beer that has at least reduced gluten content. So you imagine pairing, 15% oats in a beer with otherwise, standard barley malt, but then hitting it with maybe Clarity Firm, which can also further help to break down that gluten and make it drinkable, to people with gluten intolerance issues. It's kind of a neat, avenue for people with gluten issues to go down.
For sure. And I think there's always going to be something out there that, appeals to everybody, every beer drinker that's out there.
There are also, I'm trying to think of, maybe it wasn't an oat beer, but I feel like New Glarus maybe had a beer, or somebody sent me a can of beer that I was like, what in the world is this? Maybe it wasn't a bigger brewery like New Glarus, but it was an oat pale ale. And I'm telling you,
oh yeah,
it was delicious. Like, I don't know if it was 100% oats. I doubt it, but and there are reasons that you wouldn't want to do that unless you're using exogenous enzymes and such, which we'll get to. But there are reasons you wouldn't want to do that. But this beer was phenomenally good. I remember it having all of those characteristics you expect, and it may have been just expectation bias on my part, but it was creamy. It was hazy. It was had this really nice soft mouthfeel with a big old thick rich white cap of foam. Like it hit all those marks. So
right.
Who knows what the recipe was on that? People like to hold those things close to their chest, but it was good. So oats can contribute a lot of good flavor, a lot of good characteristics to beer, which I think most of us already accept in general. So some of that stuff, we're looking at fuller body, just to kind of review what we've gone over. Fuller body, silky, creamy mouthfeel, improved foam. And a lot of people, I'm curious what your thoughts are on the flavor contribution of oats, because the way I've described it always has been kind of nutty and cookie-like. But again, the association of oatmeal with cookies may very well be influencing my description there.
I can definitely see where that's coming from. Kind of going off on a tangent about the rye and caraway seeds and the perceived spiciness and whatnot. I think it kind of aligns with that idea. For me personally, I don't really recall the nutty flavor, but I think it's because of the fact that I typically use it in either porters or stouts, where the roast is going to dominate. Kind of thinking about it in terms of like hops and like how Citra is such a dominant flavor and aroma that it's going to stand out over anything else. I think that the roast character in the stout is going to carry out more so than the oats and that perceived nuttiness.
Yeah.
So it's just interesting. I like the idea of it, and I can definitely see how it could be perceived that way.
Well, and that's a really good point too. And you think about oats are insanely pale. They make malted oats that have similar levels of kilning and roasting as barley malt. But if you just think about flaked oats in general, they're not contributing much color. We're going to get into what flaked oats actually are here in just a sec, but. You're right. It's more like, in a weird way, it contributes to the canvas. So instead of just this blank barley canvas, it's a blank-ish barley and oat canvas on which you're throwing, roasted grains, caramel malts, other specialty grains, and that flavor is really intended to stand out. It's really that back end stuff that we're looking for, right? The mouthfeel,
right?
The foam quality stuff. So I think that's an interesting quality of oats in general, and the perspective brewers have of it. So now there's really just two main types of oats, or ways in which they are processed and prepared for using in general in brewing. And I don't want to get all the way into the weeds on like steel cut oats and all of that stuff. So we're going to go with the two kind of like main ways that they're made are malted and flaked. So with malted oats, it's basically the same process as with barley or wheat or any other cereal grain that gets malted, is that it's steeped, it's germinated, and then it's kilned. And in doing that, the starches that are on the inside or the enzymes are activated, right, that allow those starches to be self-converted when put through the mash. Again, we're dumbing this down massively. But so malted oats are technically capable of self-conversion with a diastatic power of around 25 degrees Lintner. Now, barley malt, some of the recommendations out there, this is just based on my memory, Steve, but some of the recommendations I've read is you really don't want to do a 100%, base malt beer, single malt base malt beer with anything lower than about 35 degrees Lintner. So what you'll see, and I've had friends who have messed around with this, obviously using brew in a bag so that they're able to lauter,
right.
Is you'll see like, 85% oat malt with 15%, say, pale or Pilsner or pale malt, something like that. And that increases that enzymatic activity enough to be able to really fully convert that mash in the way that you want it. So those are malted oats. Another term for them, I believe, is golden naked oats. I believe that's a malted and kilned oat product. And it's excellent stuff. I mean, I've used it a lot. It's different than barley malt in my experience. We should do some experiments on that. But malted oats are an awesome product that I don't feel get nearly as much attention as the flake stuff. But you've used malted oats before?
I have. And I don't really recall exactly what I've used it for. I might have used it in a stout here and there, or maybe a brown ale. I would have to look back in my recipes. But yeah, I know it's been in my brewery, so I've used it.
I've got some out in my brewery right now still, in fact, that I picked up a couple of years ago. I just haven't used it, but again, it's still kind of viewed, and I don't know if it needs to be, it's still kind of viewed though as a kind of an adjunct grain that you're not going to use a big amount of, like you would barley malt. So, but that's malted oats. The other main way that oats are prepared for use, and I say use not just in brewing, but in eating, is that they are flaked or rolled. Now, there are people on the internet who are going to parse out the differences in everything. So I did do a little bit of digging. So first off, flaked oats are unmalted and dehusked. So the husk on the outside of that oat groat gets taken off, and then the kernel is moistened and then pressed between rollers, which creates heat because of the friction, and that heat gelatinizes the starches that are, endemic in that kernel, making them usable in brewing without a cereal mash. So a cereal mash is just taking basically a raw grain, cooking it like you would oatmeal almost, even though it's not necessary. Or corn is a good example. A lot of times people want to use corn. You got to do a cereal mash. And then that opens up the enzymatic stuff and makes it usable in your beer. Well, flaked oats, you don't have to do that, but they're also not malted. So it's not contributing much in the way of fermentable sugar. It is used almost solely for purposes of increasing body, improving foam, contributing that creamy mouthfeel, and then maybe a little bit for flavor, as some will say.
Yeah. I mean, I don't try to expect too much from the oats other than what I'm looking for to contribute: the body, the foam, and of course the dreaded mouthfeel. And flavor. Okay, I can see how it can contribute, but I'm not gonna go out of my way to try to detect the flavor of it.
Yeah, good luck doing that. And,
Right.
There are homebrewers out there who are convinced they can taste flaked oats, but whatever, let them have it. So now here's the thing. So we talked about malted oats and flaked oats as being the primary, types of processing that oats can go through to prep them for consumption. Underneath the flaked oats umbrella, now steel cut oats, my understanding would be, they take the groat and they chop it up to make it just for quicker cooking on its own. So that's kind of in its own camp. But under the flaked oats umbrella, you've got old-fashioned oats and quick oats. Now, old-fashioned oats are technically described as being a, quote, rolled oat. And if you look online enough, like I did, and I just don't want to spin any oat experts out there the wrong way, what I read was that the difference between a flaked oat, or that pressing process that occurs to make flaked oats, and a rolled oat is the way in which they're treated prior to going through the rollers. The flaked oats are moistened first. Apparently rolled oats are not. And that results in rolled oats having a slightly smaller flake, whereas flaked oats tend to be a little bit wider or have a larger diameter. Now, that could be complete junk. I don't know. I just thought it was an interesting thing that I found online. So for all intents and purposes, we're just going to say that flaked oats are essentially old-fashioned oats that you can buy at the grocery store, and often for less than what you're going to pay at the homebrew shop, which I understand that homebrew shops are struggling. So, but it is more convenient if you're sitting at home and you're like, crap, I'm out of flaked oats, just to run up to the grocery store, pick up some Quaker, and and come home and you're good to go.
Oh yeah.
Now, one of the things that I read while researching this, and that it reminded me of issues that came up back in the day, was that sometimes certain oat brands, like oatmeal brands, will add fortify their oats with minerals and vitamins and stuff like that. And I really am not sure if Quaker does that or not. But
I'm not sure. We would have to research that.
But in my experience, it hasn't had much of an impact if they do. So that's okay. Right. Now, Quick Oats. The Quick Oats are very interesting. They again, you've got flaked oats, and then you go one step down. You got old fashioned oats. It's just a different way of doing flaked oats that produces pretty much similar, product. And then you got Quick Oats, which are basically just old fashioned oats that have been flattened a little bit thinner, or I should say, or chopped up into even smaller pieces so that they just cook quicker. That's all Quick Oats are. So ostensibly, old fashioned oats and Quick Oats are identical with every exception except their size, post-processing size. And so I think that's interesting. Are you aware of any other differences between them, or?
No, not really. Just thinking off the top of my head now with the Quick Oats and them being smaller, maybe it's a Quick Oat because you can eat it faster, less less in your mouth. I don't know. I have no idea. We would have to rely on the interwebs or some oats experts that will be emailing us after this drops.
It's coming.
I know it is.
Well, I'll tell you, if you're looking at things like, I think oats, while they're associated with breakfast, of course, they're also highly associated with dessert, with oatmeal cookies. And one of my favorite desserts of all time is this no-bake chocolate oatmeal cookie drop thing that my mom used to make. My sister just made it for Thanksgiving, and I got to eat it again. It's so good. But you have to use old-fashioned oats in it because Quick Oats are too small, and it creates there is some debate as to what oat is best to use in desserts. Well, that debate obviously is going to get carried over into other realms such as brewing. And so, what I could find online, I don't remember necessarily debating anybody on this because I would usually tap out of such banal conversations before they got too deep. But my understanding is that most people accept that they have similar flavor and aroma characteristics. The main differences, again, are in their size, and that apparently some believe can contribute different things in the way of body, mouthfeel, and foam.
I can see that. I think going back to looking in our cabinet today, and there's this huge, ginormous bag of old-fashioned oats that we bought from Costco about 5 months ago, and it's still sitting in our cabinet because it's huge. But just the difference in using those when my wife makes oatmeal quite often, and I'm sorry, not oatmeal, granola. Granola with these, and it was different than when we would use it for use Quick Oats to just make a bowl of oatmeal or whatever.
Yeah.
So I can definitely see how there can be a difference.
Yeah, and there are, and I'm going to kind of speak for you a little bit here, Steve, because as we get further into this and closer to talking about the experiment that you performed, oftentimes we're inspired by personal curiosities. Other times we're inspired by other people's curiosities. And I wonder in the case of this experiment, which we'll get to soon, which one of those was the biggest inspiration? Because oats are such an interesting, the comparison of flaked oats and old fashioned oats sounds so meh, but who knows? We want to test it all out. So again, when you're considering using oats in your beer, you're looking at anywhere between 5, 10, up to 15% for most styles, just for body and foam contribution. And again, we discussed it already. They're most commonly associated with darker styles like brown ale, porter, and stout. I think that's well accepted, but they can absolutely be used in other styles as well. Now, the probably the most popular style of beer that oats are going to be used in these days is Oatmeal Stout, which is described by the BJCP as a dark, roasty, full-bodied stout with enough sweetness to support the oat backbone. The sweetness, balance, and oatmeal impression can vary considerably. Now, I'm not entirely sure what Gordon and Chris were thinking with oatmeal impression, because I'm not sure what that is exactly, as we've discussed. Do you have an idea of what they mean by oatmeal impression, Steve? Because I don't.
I would. I don't know for sure. Maybe it goes back to the mouthfeel and the silkiness. But I don't know. That's a good question.
Well, for me, it's like that to me is an insinuation to flavor, like the oat flavor.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong on that. But in oatmeal stout, which I love. I don't know if I taste the oats or not. I'm just being kind of skeptical there. But regardless, I love stout, and I've made many batches of oatmeal stout over the years. While I've never personally done a side-by-side comparison myself, I have always felt that the oats contributed all of that stuff they're expected to in terms of body and mouthfeel, not so much in terms of flavor. But that is something I've come to probably in the last 5 years as I've kind of opened my mind to being more skeptical about this stuff. Well, as I mentioned earlier, I switched from using the flaked oats found at homebrew shops to store-bought oats a few years ago, and initially didn't really pay much attention to whether they were even old-fashioned or quick oats. In my own experience, they both worked perfectly fine, but were they contributing different characteristics? That's exactly what you aim to find out in a recent experiment, Steve. Results from that when we are back from this break.
This is John Middlecoff from 3 and Out with John Middlecoff. You know what my friends at Travis Matthew have done? They've taken leisure wear to the next level. I didn't even know they made these. These slide slip hoodies. I don't have an undershirt on. You just wear it over. You can wear it around the house as a podcaster. I wear these things every day. I told them, send me about 10 more. Watch football for a living. We'll be on my couch in this thing all day long. Obviously, they're hats. No hats fit better. They also sent me a pair of jeans. These legacy featherweight jeans. Got a little stretch in them. The wintertime, we might put on a few extra around the holidays. How good do these look? I was even playing golf with a buddy the other day. He's like, I love their jeans. I'm like, yeah, they're the best. And then these daily slip shoes. Wear them with shorts, wear them with jeans, wear them to work, wear them to a date, wear them just hanging out. Cannot recommend their stuff enough. So do yourself a favor and hit up TravisMatthew.com. All new customers get 20% off their first order. Again, that's TravisMatthew.com. You'll thank me later.
There's no denying that stainless steel is the best material for brewing equipment, and Delta Brewing Systems offers some of the lowest prices on high-quality stainless gear, like the Firm Tank, which in addition to holding 8 gallons or 30 liters of wort, comes with a domed lid to even further reduce the chances of a messy blow-off. Plus, it can hold up to 4 psi of pressure for closed transfers. Delta Brewing Systems also has their own line of brew kettles, as well as one of the lowest-priced all-in-one electric brewing systems out there, and their prices are shockingly low. If you're in the market for legit stainless gear that won't break the bank, do yourself a favor and head over to deltabrewingsystems.com today.
Got great ideas, but no idea how to build a website? Get Bluehost. Their AI design tool creates high-quality WordPress sites super fast. Whether you're a blogger, influencer, or launching a side hustle, Bluehost helps boost your growth with built-in marketing and e-commerce tools. Upgrade to cloud and get 100% uptime and 24/7 security to stay online all the time. Why wait? You've got the vision. Make it real. Visit Bluehost.com to get started.
New York Times bestselling author Jennifer L. Armentrout's Blood and Ash series is captivating and sexy. Chosen at birth to usher in a new era, Poppy's life has never been hers. Waiting for the day of her ascension, she would rather be with the gods fighting the evil that took her family. The entire kingdom rests on her shoulders when Hawk, a god bound to her ascension, enters her life. She is tangled with desire. He tempts her with the forbidden, a kingdom. Blood and Ash, a twisting, steamy escape, available in print, ebook, and audiobook where books are sold.
Oats are a key ingredient in certain styles, especially oatmeal stout. And while flaked oats made specifically for brewers is available, sometimes it's just easier to pick up some oatmeal while you're doing your weekly grocery shopping. Of course, this leaves one with a decision to make: old-fashioned oats or quick oats. You were curious to see how these types of oats compare and designed a fun experiment to test it out, Steve.
Yeah, so I kind of going back to a question you had earlier about like my thought process on doing this experiment. I'm always fascinated by when there's two of something, and I can tackle that in an experiment and seeing, like Vienna malt and versus Munich malt, like very similar, kind of sometimes different, but I'm just interested in that, and seeing where things go with that. That was kind of the thought process with the old fashioned versus the quick oats experiment that I did earlier last year, I think it was. And the recipe that I created, fairly simple, 69% pale malt, 10% either old fashioned oats or quick oats, 9% of Munich malt. And then 5% chocolate malt, 5% of roasted barley, and then to make sure that I had enough color in the beer, 2% of black malt. And fairly simple recipe there. Nothing that is too different than I've seen from either home brewers or from pro brewers.
Yeah, it's a great grain bill. I've made my oatmeal stout recipe is surprisingly similar to this one. I think I go up to 15% oats, but in our discussions leading up to the development or the design of this experiment, one of the things we talked about was, well, okay, we could always go overboard, and we do that a lot, right? With our experiment designs, we test the extreme, but oats are very rarely used in extreme amounts. That is not the typical, way that brewers are using oats. They're using it in between 5 and 15%. And so we settled on this 10% number because of that. We wanted to see, are these two types of oats going to contribute differences when used normally? And I think that's the important question with certain experiments, and that's what we rolled with here.
For sure. I think I remember a conversation that we all the contributors had with this experiment, and like trying to find that happy medium, because at times you want to really express and showcase that what we're actually experimenting with or what we're trying to test out. But then again, as we're learning more and more about oats, there's definitely a threshold that if you cross it, it's not going to be as effective as, say, if you hold back a little bit and not use so much.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So took my grain bill, mashed at 155 degrees Fahrenheit. That's 68 C for a standard 60 minutes. When mash is complete, I removed my bag, squeezed the hell out of it, and started to boil for 60 minutes. And a single hop addition of Magnum at 28 grams at 60 minutes. After I boiled, I chilled and took a gravity reading. Both were at 1.058. Which was pretty spot on with what I was aiming for, and with this particular experiment.
Yeah, 1058, pretty respectable. I mean, that's kind of going to be a heftier oatmeal stout, which that's great. I love that. The fact that both of them were the same, this is one of those things when we're designing or performing the experiments, and you're brewing two batches side by side, where it's like, all right, everything at this point is mostly identical. Let's see how close these OGs are going to be. Well, the fact that you've got flaked oats and quick oats could have contributed a difference on that front, but the fact it didn't kind of already starts to send this message that, all right, they are more similar than they are different, at least in terms of what they're contributing. We know that they're unmalted, so wouldn't expect much of a contribution, but everything else still seems to be keeping equal. So good stuff here.
So then after taking my reading, I pitched a fresh batch pouch of Imperial Yeast A10, which is darkness, which is usually what I use for my dark beers, fermented at 68 Fahrenheit, that's 20 C, for 3 weeks, and then took a gravity reading, and this is where the only kind of difference kind of came about. Old-fashioned came out at 1016 final gravity reading, and the quick oats batch was at 1015 final gravity reading. I don't really see a big difference there. I would love to drink with somebody who can perceive that difference, but I don't really see the big difference there. What do you think, Marshall?
No, yeah, we see this all the time, right? The fact that you started at the same OG, that you measured both, mashes and they were at the same temperature, there might be some fluctuation of a degree Fahrenheit or two. I mean, that's like a half a degree Celsius, and that may have contributed to attenuation stuff. But in this case, I think it's as fine-tuned as our hydrometers are and our eyeballs tend to be, sometimes it's just like, well, maybe there was a bubble stuck to the thing. So we report what we see, but I don't think 1015 to 1016, a single specific gravity point difference, really is that big of a deal. So in this case, we can chalk it up to the difference between the old-fashioned and the quick oats if we want to, but I don't think that that's very meaningful. So
Exactly. So at this point, the beers were pressure transferred with CO2 purged kegs and placed on gas in my keezer, allowed to carbonate and condition for about 2 weeks before I sent it off, or I evaluated the beers myself and with tasters.
Yeah, so I'm looking at the photos right now. The side-by-side picture. First off, I would drink the hell out of that beer all day today. Oh, yeah. We got a nice gray, cool Fresno day here as we approach winter, and an oatmeal stout sounds phenomenal, and these ones look great. I did notice, and I'm assuming this has to do with the way you poured the beers, but the head on them isn't very big, and I do the same thing when I'm filling glasses for pictures, is I try to get the logo on our glasses to show, and sometimes if the head's too big, it doesn't, so I'll scoop some off or whatever. But otherwise, they actually look. Some of the stuff that I think stands out is, one, they are very dark, as they should be. That head does have and correct me if I'm wrong, but it kind of has the tinge of tan to it, which I would expect from black malt, right?
Right.
But they also look very clear. They're darkly opaque, but they don't look hazy opaque.
No, not at all. Yeah, I mean, it was a pretty clear beer. I enjoyed it thoroughly.
Well, and that to me is the first point of curiosity is, we know that these oats have higher protein. I would expect that to contribute more of a haze, but is there other stuff? Now, I've heard, this is complete, I'm not going to even give a name to who said this to me, but that roasted malts actually help with clarity as well. That there's, in some way, the acid from them helps to I don't know if it's the acid or not. That was me going off the rails, which is I got to be careful with that. But that's something about the roasted grain can help contribute to clarity of final beer, and I think that's interesting. I think I've witnessed something like that. But regardless, something about the 10% oats didn't seem to negatively impact the clarity of either of these beers. Again, they are too dark to see through the glass, but if you look on the edges of that glass, it's very obviously not hazy, and I thought that was kind of interesting. So.
Very interesting, and as is the idea that roast helps to contribute to that.
Do not perpetuate the Marshall myth over here. That is something that I heard from somebody else, and I thought it was curious. Yeah, we haven't. I don't know how you would test that out because obviously people. Yeah, so I just thought it was interesting. Yeah. So tell us how you did on your. We always do 5 sets of triangle tests ourselves. We call them semi-blind because we obviously know the variable. How did you do on your set of 5 triangles?
I did horrible on it. I only got it 1 out of 5. I thought that both beers were perceived as had a nice grainy flavor, creamy texture. I spoke about the mouthfeel to my wife just to annoy her, which complemented the roastiness of it. It was a wonderful beer. I look forward to brewing it again, and I could not tell a difference. These beers were identical to me, so it satisfied my curiosity of always looking at the old-fashioned oats compared to the quick oats when I'm walking up and down the aisles at the grocery store, and always thinking about that experiment, so it helped me to kind of put that to bed finally.
Yeah, well, and that's the whole purpose of these experiments. And again, to get back to before we get to the blind participant results, to get back to that inspiration for this, oftentimes the inspiration is we've read about this on forums or somebody brought it up on Reddit, and there's some disagreement about whether quick oats or old fashioned oats, if you're going the store bought Quaker route, basically, if they have a meaningful impact on beer. And for you in your own blind triangles, you can say with confidence that it didn't. But of course, we don't want to trust just you, Steve. So we end up serving these beers to 26 blind participants. And by blind, obviously they're aware that it's a dark beer. We're not necessarily against telling the style, but in this case, you did not inform them that it was an oatmeal stout. Rather, you just served them the triangles. Again, 26 participants, none of whom knew the variable or the necessarily the style. Out of that 26, 14 would have had to identify the unique sample in order for us to say with any amount of confidence that the differences that they perceived were meaningful, that they were actually there, and that it wasn't just a function of random guessing. But in this case, only 10 people, 38% of these tasters, were able to distinguish these beers or guess the odd one out. What does that say to you, Steve?
And I do want to mention this in the article. I mentioned it as well. That the tasters were both from my homebrew club. I brought to a meeting, a monthly meeting, and then I also went to Workforce, and I was able to test out the experiment with patrons from Workforce Brewing Company out in Plainfield, which is close to me, and so two different sets of people, and it's interesting that only 10 were able to find the odd beer out.
And what you're deferring to there is the experience level of these people. That if there is anybody who's going to be able to tell these apart, even without knowing what the variable is, it's going to be people who know beer, right? Who are familiar with beer, who kind of have an idea of what to look for, how to perceive differences, the finer details of a pint, in essence. And in this case, they just couldn't do that. So that sends a message to me. It sounds like you were about to get to that before I cut you off.
No, yeah. I mean, and it's the people who like myself enjoy talking about mouthfeel, right? And who are able to have an appreciation for the sort of the background of the beer, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And not everything that's just out, in the forefront, but rather like what else does the beer contribute? And that to me is really interesting about beer.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And what I pull from experiments like this. So I've told people kind of tongue in cheek, that I interpret these results personally, and then there's a way that I interpret them publicly. And the public way is usually, you can read the results for what they're worth and make of them what you will. It's only beer. You're not going to hurt yourself, right? Personally, on this one, it just furthered my belief that it doesn't matter what kind of oats you're using. If you're making a beer with oats in it, you can use quick oats. You can use old-fashioned oats. You can go to the homebrew shop and get flaked oats. Now, I'm not going to equate these three with, malted oats or with other forms of oats, because that's not what we're talking about here. Now, we have done experiments on that. Please go check it out on the website. But in this case, it really does seem that you can get away with whatever it is you want, at least at 10% of the grist, right? Because that's what you did in this experiment. Now, what I would love to see for in the future is an oatmeal stout made with and without oats. So do one that's maybe upwards of 15%, and another one that 15% is just replaced with, more barley malt or whatever to keep it at the same, OG.
Right.
Maybe then we could more closely determine, the flavor and aroma impact. But I say that as a segue into our first reader comment, because Max, who commented on the experiment article, this isn't the only comment that we're going to get to on this, but I do think it's an interesting one, kind of is going down a path here that I feel like that proposed experiment that I just brought up would help him to more solidify his opinions on this. So Max says, after many years of trial and error, I've come to the reluctant conclusion that the only thing oats contribute is a slow runoff. By the way, that's the beta glucan at work there. He says, I believe the purported, quote, creamy mouthfeel is more homebrewer wives' tale than anything else. Why would it have been included originally in commercial recipes? Like the flaked barley and Guinness, I suspect more for economic reasons than anything else. Unmalted grains costing less than malted. What say you, Steve? This is the kind of comment that I'm like, ooh, a dude who's, I see eye to eye with Max here.
I mean, yeah, I can't necessarily disagree with them. I think it's an interesting comment. So yeah. What do you think?
Here's the thing. If I were just to come out and say I agree with Max, then there are going to be people who are like, see, Marshall agrees with this. Yeah. And there are going to be people who get mad at me because they think I'm agreeing. It's not that I agree with his comment that it doesn't contribute anything. I fully, wholeheartedly support this line of thinking when it comes to beer ingredients because I understand on some level, perhaps marginally differently than other people do, human perception, only because I've studied it for the last 25 years of my life.
Right.
We are impressionable beings. We are so easily influenced. We are insanely gullible. And as much as we might try to think that we're unbiased, there's a fun little saying that among some people in my field of work, I'm a psychologist. For those of you who may not know that, is, the harder somebody tries to fight that they're biased, the more biased they likely are, right? It's because of the fact of bias. It's just a natural, universal experience, and we're all susceptible to it. We're all operating on it day in and day out. It just is its thing. Well, if I were to serve you 2 pints of, let's say, IPA, and I said one of these was made with orange peel. This one right here in cup A has orange peel in it, and this one doesn't. Tell me the differences you perceive. There is a very, very strong chance that the one that I tell you was made with orange peel, you're going to taste orange peel in, whether it was made with orange peel or not. That's just the way we operate, and it's used in marketing on the daily. To me, it would make sense if I'm brewing beer back in the 1800s, and I start using this grain that was typically used for feeding cattle in my beer, for me to spin it as some benefit, right? Whether that's, creamy mouthfeel, because when you make a bowl of oatmeal, it's creamy. So if I can trigger that association in you as a consumer or a potential consumer, the chances that you're going to soften your perspective of this new thing is much higher than if I say, hey, remember those things we were feeding to cows and horses before? We're using it to make beer now. That doesn't sound appealing. So it makes sense to me what Max is saying, in essence, that if we can make it feel like it's more meaningful than it is, then more people are going to accept it and they're going to spend their money on it. And so I'm now, does that mean I think Guinness doesn't need to use flaked barley when they're making the, I don't care. That's my thing. I don't care about that. I do think it would be a fascinating experiment to do, again, flaked barley in a dry Irish dry stout, 15%, or whatever the typical go-to is for a Guinness clone, and then make one without it and see if people can perceive a difference, because that's really where the rubber hits the road, is in the data, right? Not in our personal opinions. So.
Yeah, that's true. The data does kind of speak louder than what our opinions are, right? So that would be interesting. And I'm actually kind of contemplating that experiment already.
I was hoping you would, Steve. Well, that does bring us to the end of this episode. Again, to turn Oats into a full hour of chatting can get kind of boring, and I concern myself with that, but I had a good time, geeking out on this brewing ingredient with you, Steve. Do you have any last words before we wrap things up?
I think that we definitely covered a lot with oats, more so than we probably ever imagined. But I think that it's an interesting ingredient to add to beers, and not only the dark beers that we've been discussing. I've had some wonderful examples, commercial examples of like yourself, a pale ale with oats, an IPAs with oats, and also I believe possibly a saison, which was interesting, and an oat lager before. The last two were like very different perception, I think. So test it out yourself. Let us know what you think, and I keep on brewing with oats.
Yeah. I mean, unless you feel like they don't contribute anything to your beer.
Exactly.
And in that case, eat your oats for good, to reduce your cholesterol. But I'm with you. I think they're a cool ingredient, and maybe they don't add much in terms of between old fashioned and quick oats. But again, we're going to look further into the impact oats have in the future, and I look forward to that. Alrighty, don't forget that you can read more about the experiment we discussed by clicking the link to the article on brewlosophy.com in the description of this episode. The Brewlosophy podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to brewlosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit patreon.com/brewlosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brewlosophy podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey, cause it suits my bro. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through the middleman.